Well, I hope all these somber faces are feeling okay.
You know, it's funny. Everybody says you should always be smiling, but
Oh,
but if you look at it, if you look at the physiology, to smile, you literally have to
yeah,
exercise. And so the natural expression for everybody, the most relaxed expression, is to be somber.
I
So
hear you.
I never got that. I never, you know, everybody said, "Oh, you're too somber," and I'm like, "No, I'm relaxed. I'm natural."
By all means.
They estimate that to smile, it takes 57 muscles in order to make the lips move into a smiling position. And there
Of
should
course,
be a way to burn calories.
yeah, we got to use all our muscles. Yeah.
Like this is the newest exercise. Everybody smile, you know. Um,
Well, I see everybody but the guy presenting. Is he off in the corner?
well, I'm presenting, so I don't know if
John, I
you
think
Oh,
you're up.
oh,
maybe.
I'm sorry. I thought it was, I guess it's the next time. I apologize. I'm glad you're there, Tony. I didn't mean to get mixed up.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you all doing?
Doing good.
Yep.
All right.
Right.
Well, we are excited for our Mastering the Art of Storytelling to have Tony Hardman. And he is not only a dedicated member of the Tejas Storytelling Association, but a very resourceful one. He has taught several of these master classes because of his astonishing range of knowledge, his 25 plus years of teaching, competitive speaking, and coaching, as well as he speaks to his depth as an educator. Tonight's topic is an additional storytelling method contained in his impressive repertoire. He will help us to explore ways for adapting literature into storytelling. This requires translating the essence of a text from a reading experience into a performance or a new medium. Still focusing on the heart of the story, the specific emotional, philosophical, or character driven message you want to convey is only a small part of fielding this adaptation successfully. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, before we begin, just so I have an idea of what everybody is hoping to expect from this, and I'm going to call on each of you individually, um, but I'm going to ask you what is your idea or concept of what it is to adapt a work of literature. And now remember, and I realize as storytellers, we have not learned how to be like Reader's Digest, where we condense our thoughts. We tend to speak for long periods of time. So I'm going to ask you to briefly tell me what you think is um, adapting literature. Okay, I'm going to start with Pam. Pam?
I always think of it as taking the gist of the story or the topic in the literature and using that as the kernel of the story, not trying to learn the whole literary thing and quote it word for word.
Okay. All right. Debbie, unmute yourself.
I would play off what Pam said, of course, remembering you don't want to do anything against copyright, that it's got to be something that's all right to use. But the question would be to stay true to the culture or the genre of literature to give that flavor while you speak.
Okay. John.
I would say telling it in your style, maybe the phrases, the adjectives, the way you express, but it's the same story.
Okay. Chester.
I really don't know enough about it to make an intelligent comment, Tony, so I'm going to try to learn tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Tim, how about you?
Unless you're Carol Birch, who does word for word interpretation of literature, my impression is that you take the heart of the story, you simplify it so that an oral listener can hear the story and understand the story. A reader can go back if they don't understand and reread. A listener cannot. So you need to simplify. You need to keep the gist of the story and keep true to the heart of the story. And if possible, if there are literary phrases in there that are absolutely beautiful and essential, maybe you do need to learn a few lines from a story by heart, most particularly usually a beginning and an end.
Okay. Alan Campbell. You need to unmute yourself. Okay. You're still muted. There you go.
I would say that you want to get the essence of the story for sure. And beyond that, I guess I'll be listening for ideas and suggestions that come up today. I kind of liked what I heard a moment ago about if there's a really beautiful phrase, you might want to find a way to include it.
Okay. Ken Ogus.
I've done this kind of processing on a number of occasions, and I start with how much time have I got for sharing this story? If it's a written story that someone might read aloud that would take an hour and 15 minutes, and realistically, I only have 20 minutes. My biggest task is first, I need to get the essential plot elements. I need to stay faithful to the way the characters are portrayed whenever possible. Translate some of the flavor of the language of that time and place, since we all, when we tell stories, we take people to a specific time and place. And in the end, you will feel as if you've heard, well, I guess, an abbreviated version of the literature. But you're shooting for the sense of satisfaction that one gets at the end of a story that has a good, solid sense of closure and ancestry.
Okay. Andrea.
Oh man. I mean, Ken just said it. So, though I will say I don't remember who mentioned Carol Birch, but I think of adapting literature as running the range from actually performing a literary work word for word all the way to substantial changes for oral storytelling. Particularly I like what Ken said about the length of the piece, that
Okay.
it really depends on how long of a piece you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Tom Franklin. I don't know if you're muted or not, but we're not hearing you.
Hang
This
on,
is
my
There
computer
we go.
is misbehaving. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of great comments. What I would add to it is to remember that storytelling and literature are two different media, and there are different strengths in storytelling than you have in literature. So it's important when you bring the story across to leverage the strengths of storytelling and not just present the literature, if I'm making sense here.
Okay. Dennis.
I'm new to storytelling, so I'm not quite sure what to expect, but hopefully I can learn something. So,
Okay, that's fine. That's good. All right, Emily.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it a lot, but I agree with what everybody's been saying. They're all good points. I figure I always learn something when I come here, so come to these
Okay.
workshops.
Okay, Eric.
My take falls in line with pretty much everyone else. I would say that in the important parts of the story, anything that stands out or is a fixed part of the culture, you would recite those things, especially beginning and ending, and anything else in between, you paraphrase and inject uh, your own personal color and personality into the story as you tell it.
Okay. Vivica.
To be honest, adapting literature seems pretty broad. Are we adapting it? It raises more questions than I have answers for. Are we adapting the literature to uh, share it as a story, or are we sharing a story and we're somehow including literature in another story? It's kind of broad for me. I don't really know I'm here to find out what it's about.
Okay. And believe it or not, we're actually going to address all three of those questions. DeAndrea.
Hold on.
Okay, you're muted. There you
Okay.
go.
Could you repeat the question because I came in a little later? I apologize for that, but could you repeat the
What is
question?
your idea? What to you is adapting literature to storytelling?
Oh, wow. I haven't done that. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so what I can remember, and this was a long time ago, you take literature and you put it into a script-like form, and or either a story, like you're taking literature and you're putting it into a, like, I guess if it's a script or not a script, I'm thinking of readers theater. You put it into a form that is fit for storytelling. So and I yeah, that's all I can say on that one. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Wanting to make sure I have everybody. Okay, Stephanie.
I think it's just taking the heart of the story and making it so that people will understand it in an oral tradition.
Okay, all right, very good. Margot. Margot Toombs.
Yes, I haven't done this before, but I would imagine I would take a piece of literature and find the elements that excite me and then build a story around that and see if I can get the audience also excited about those elements in the piece.
Okay. I think pretty much everybody has the same concept, so I'm not going to go ahead and ask everyone else because I think it's going to be pretty much repetitious. Does anybody have anything in addition to what has already been said? And if you raise your hand, like if you go into the React and hit the raise hand, your frame will go to the front and I will be able to see that you have a question. Okay, it looks like Oni Lasana.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tony. It depends on the type of literature. I really enjoy taking classic so-called fairy tales like Cinderella. And what I did was I actually updated to a modern version of Cinderella. So it depends on the literature you're dealing with, how far
Right.
you want to adjust it or adapt it or rearrange it to tell. It depends on the genre of the literature.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, we've come up with several different concepts, and believe it or not, I'm going to try and address each one of those tonight. However, now as an educator, this is something that I basically try to explain to my students in my public speaking classes, because there's a lot of misconception as to what is storytelling, what is not storytelling. Now, in the theatrical circle, okay, storytelling is taking a story and telling it in your own words. Okay, I think that's pretty much basic. However, there are a lot of great stories in literature. I have seen at storytelling concerts and at storytelling festivals where storytellers have taken a famous story and they basically memorized it and then recited it as though they were telling the story. Okay, and I've seen this done with some very, very famous stories. And I've seen some really top-notch storytellers do this. And of course, as an educator, my immediate reaction is that isn't really storytelling. That is what we call oral interpretation. Oral interpretation is where you take a written word, you either read it or recite it word for word as the author wrote it, and you put a dramatic interpretation on that particular story or on that particular work of literature. Okay. Now, the big debate is there are some, and I have gone to these storytellers and I heard recite a famous story. And I've said, that was really good. Your performance was incredible, but that's not really storytelling. And they will argue with me and they say, yes, it is, because that particular author told the story. And I am telling that story the way the author wrote it. And they will argue that it is storytelling. I've heard it, like one of the greatest storytellers of the 21st century is Steven Spielberg, you know, the film director. And in a sense, yes, it is, because he puts on film and tells a story. But when we talk about storytelling, the performance of storytelling, that's really not what we're talking about. Okay, so the debate is, does oral interpretation, especially if it is done with the idea of memorizing the literary work and then reciting it as the author presented it, is that storytelling? Or if it is or isn't, should it be allowed as part of a storytelling concert or a storytelling festival? Okay, now I will tell you, I have seen some national tellers do this. And I have seen some of the most famous stories in literature memorized, and the person got up and recited it word for word. One classic example is Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. Most festivals have like a ghost story night. I know Texas does. I know Timpanogos Storytelling Festival in Orem, Utah does that. They have a ghost night. And it seems like almost every year that they do it, somebody has memorized The Telltale Heart and told it. And I'm like, you know, this is great. And The Telltale Heart is one of my favorite works of literature. And the guy was incredible performing it. I mean, he had us, you know, and by the end of it, when the guy goes insane, I mean, he was going insane. It was very, very entertaining. I have had a national storyteller tell or recite The Red-Headed League by Arthur Conan Doyle, a Sherlock Holmes story. And he recited, he didn't tell it in his own word, he recited the entire story. One of the most famous ones that I've seen do this was somebody told, they actually memorized and recited the story of The Elephant's Child by Rudyard Kipling. It's a kind of a children's story, and he did it for a children's audience. But he memorized Rudyard Kipling's style and wording and rhythm and everything else. And he told the story basically of how the elephant got its trunk. And again, I'm saying this really isn't storytelling, but at the same time, it was very entertaining. And they were reciting great stories. So I'm kind of in the crossroads with this. But so you understand, really, if you recite a work of literature, or even if you were to read a work of literature, it is not storytelling, it is oral interpretation. Now, usually in the case of a specific reading, and that's what we would call it a reading. So if I were to get up and I were to take a book and I were to read Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart or any of his stories, I am doing a dramatic reading because that is a very dramatic piece. A humorous reading would be one where it is lighthearted, not necessarily funny, but lighthearted that has a happy ending. So now, if you were to do more than one work of literature, we would call that a program. And that's where we would recite or read more than one work of literature. Okay, so I don't know, because I have said this, and I have even gone to these storytellers and I have said, this is not storytelling. And they have argued with me. And in two cases, they were national tellers. And I really didn't want to argue with the national teller. Okay, Ken, I see you have a question.
Well, it's more of a comment, Tony. You know, we have the better part of an hour or 90 minutes. And if you're going to cover both how one would memorize a story that is long and word for word, that would be a whole workshop in itself. May I suggest that I'm perfectly happy saying no, a recitation, oral interpret, that's not storytelling. It's the recitation of a story, yes. And just put it on the shelf and focus on how people adapt.
Right. But the only reason I'm bringing this up is there are a lot of newcomers that are not aware of this. So I'm just simply giving them the background for that.
Got it.
So that they understand this is oral interpretation, this is storytelling. Okay. All right. So, all right. Now that we've established that, okay, then there is, okay, what do we do to make that story something that we can tell? And I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, somebody like Edgar Allan Poe or Rudyard Kipling, they are known for their style. Most of the stories that they do are very, very familiar to people. And when you tell a story, retell a story in their words, they're going to make a comparison. Dennis, I see you have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just have a real quick question. Like you were saying, I'm new, so I don't really understand any of this. Now, you mentioned that somebody that was telling Edgar Allan Poe's story word for word, that's not really storytelling. That is what was it called? Oral interpretation.
Oral interpretation, yes.
Okay. How does that differ if somebody tells like the Three Little Pigs or something? I mean,
we're going to get to that. Okay.
Okay. Is that oral interpretation or is that storytelling? So,
well, it depends.
My depth of literature isn't that great. That's why I went to Three Little Pigs.
Right. Okay. If you find a book and you basically tell the Three Little Pigs pretty much as that book tells it, then it's oral interpretation.
Okay.
But if you just say, hey, I'm going to tell you the story of the Three Little Pigs, then that's storytelling.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
It's a little nuanced, but I can try to figure it out. So, okay. All right.
Yes.
Again, I'm new to the situation, so I don't know anything.
Right.
So,
See, and this is why I wanted to discuss this part of it, because I'm also a librarian, and I have been a children's librarian, and I was hired at Salt Lake County Library System to do the children's programming, and my boss, who was the director of the library system, says, "Okay, you have a children's background, so I want you to do the programs, even if you're the library manager." And I'm like, okay. So being the storyteller that I am, I told the story. And I got raked over the coals because I told the story. And they said, "This is a library, you're supposed to be reading books." And I said, "Well, that's fine, but you told me to tell the story." And they didn't grasp the idea that reading a book is not the same as storytelling.
okay. You're the librarian, so you have the advantage. I'm an economist, so I don't have any advantage. So,
Yes.
okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
thanks.
Right. And see, this is why I wanted to explain this part of it, because there is a great misconception as to what is really storytelling and that. Okay. So I am going to get into like how to adapt the literature and that type of thing, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understands that that controversy is out there and that a lot of misconceptions that we face is because of that. Okay. I remember once when I was unemployed, and so I took a temporary job as a cashier. And they were having some kind of event at the store to get people to come in. And they said, "Oh, we're going to have Tony sit in the corner and read books," you know? And I'm like, "Why are you having me read books?" And said, "Well, because you're a storyteller. And that's what storytellers do, right?" I'm like, no, that is not even close to what storytellers do. But see, that's a thing that we have to face. Somebody may call us up and say, "We want you to come and tell stories." And then they want to know where your books are because they really don't understand that concept. And that's something that we have to basically face and deal with. And that's why I'm bringing this part of it up. Okay, now to me, but okay, Betsy in chat has said, "What is the definition of literature?" And I'm actually going to get to that. Okay, I actually have a handout, and this is in your notes if you want to look at this. But I'm going to bring this up. And okay, basically, oral interpretation, you are interpreting literature. Readings can be poems, short stories, excerpts from novels. So, in other words, a novel is literature, or a nonfiction work, scenes from plays or plays, essays, letters, and well known speeches. Okay, a reading consists of a longer work. So basically, that is literature. Literature is anything that is in written form. Okay. So any book is literature. Now, what we mistake as literature, or what we often refer to as literature, is what is referred to as classical literature. That is the stories of Poe. That is the plays of Shakespeare. That is the poetry of Dante or Chaucer. Okay, that is classical literature. But if I were to pick up a book right now and read out of it, it may not be a great work of literature, so to speak, but it is still literature. Okay. Betty.
Yeah,
Has,
I want to just quickly follow up. In my mind, as I've been listening to you, literature is a piece of written work that has an author.
right.
And I thought that because of the Three Little Pigs, there is no author attached to that story anymore.
No, there isn't. That's a traditional folk tale. So that is not considered a work of literature. However, there is a very famous children's picture book called The Three Little Pigs, and I don't remember who the writer was, but it was a Caldecott winner. And so that is often referred to when somebody wants to do the Three Little Pigs. And usually, especially in the case of a library situation, they read his work. They're reading that book. So thus it becomes literature because he wrote it. You know, one of the best ways of telling it, whether you would consider it literature or not, is if on the book it says retold by. So if there's a story and it says retold by, that means they have taken a famous fairy tale that no one knows the author and they are retelling it in their own words. Okay. And that's one of the ways to tell whenever you're reading a children's picture book. If it says retold by, then that means it is a traditional oral folk story that has been passed down. Okay. All right. So basically, literature is an author. Okay. Where we know that that author has created an original work. Now, like I said, in a lot of children's books, a lot of people retell famous folk tales. Technically, they are the author of that particular book. Okay. If you want to get down to brass tacks, not Hans Christian Andersen, the Grimm brothers and Charles Perrault are retellers. Where they make a significant contribution to literature is they became one of the first people to take all of these oral stories and put them on the written page. And some people will actually read the story as the Grimm brothers or Charles Perrault wrote it. Charles Perrault is not original. He's original in the sense that he is the first person in France to take French folk tales and put them to pen. But like Cinderella, all of the stories, there are several stories that are traditional folk tales. And he basically retells them. Okay. However, both are known for style. And so a lot of times people will say, I'm going to read you the way the Grimm brothers wrote this, or I'm going to read the way Charles Perrault wrote this. And even when telling a story, because they are such legends in the literary world, when that story is told, and this is where Debbie made a point, they say, I am going to tell you the Charles Perrault version of the story, or I'm going to tell you the Grimm brothers version of the story. Okay. Okay, so I kind of lost my train of thought here for a minute, but literature basically is a written work where there is a known author and it is considered an original work rather than a retelling of something else. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Okay, for example, there were a lot of medieval morality plays. Some of you may have heard of Everyman. Okay, that is anonymous. But we know there was an author who wrote that. And they were a playwright for a traveling theater troupe, and they went around and they performed these morality plays. Because either the author was considered a group effort, or because the author did not want to be known, it is listed as anonymous. But nevertheless, the play of Everyman is an original work of literature. It is not a retelling. It's just, we know there was an author, we just don't know who the author was in that particular case. Okay, so we understand literature. Now, literature can be a source of great storytelling. A lot of times, and not just like folk tales or not like famous classics. Okay, but a lot of times we might read something and we say, oh, wow, that would make a great story. So then I take that work, that written work, and I adapt it so that I can tell it as a story. Okay, so in that respect, I am adapting a work of literature into a story. Now, the story may not be The Telltale Heart. It may not be The Elephant's Child. It may not be The Red-Headed League. Okay, but it is still a written work. And because I am taking that story from the printed page and telling it in my own words, then I have adapted that work of literature for storytelling purposes. Okay? All right. Now, there are several ways that you can adapt literature. One is you can incorporate the literature as part of the story. Okay, Elizabeth Ellis gave a wonderful workshop a couple of years ago. Chester attended this. I don't know if anybody else here did or not, but I know Chester did. But basically, she says, come up with a poem and then tell a story that is something similar to what the poem contains. And then figure out how to include works of the poem as part of the story. So like you could be telling a story and then you would recite part of a poem, and then you would go on with the story and you would recite part of the poem. Now, originally, her exercise for all of us that took this workshop was we were supposed to create a story. And this was a workshop, by the way, that was done on Zoom, and it was like 2 or 3 parts to it. And so our homework assignment was we were supposed to come up with a story, and then we were to include a poem as part of that story. Nobody came back with a finished story. Now, the funny thing of it is I actually thought this was a cool writing exercise. I found the poem, The Spider and the Fly by Mary Howitt. Welcome to my parlor, said the spider to the fly. And basically the whole poem is how this spider is trying to lure the fly in to its web so it can catch it and, of course, eat it. And to me, the poem reminded me of a predator, and particularly a sexual predator. So I wrote this story about how this predator lured a victim so that he could take advantage. And I did part of the story, and then I did a stanza of The Spider and the Fly. Then I wrote more of the story, and then I did another. And I wrote the story and I included the entire poem, but it was interrupted. Now, because of the deep nature of the story, I never read it. I never said I completed the assignment, and I never read it. But it is a very effective way that you can take a story and use a work of literature to enhance that story. Now, and I'll give you an example, okay? Anne Frank, everybody is familiar with The Diary of Anne Frank. By the way, the actual title of that is The Diary of a Young Girl. There are passages of that diary that are just incredibly inspirational. You could tell a story of Anne Frank. You could do a fringe, for example, of the Anne Frank character. But what would be more enhancing of that story as you told it if you said, well, I remember recording in my diary, and then you quote that part of the diary. And then that makes it even more powerful. I heard a storyteller. He was a historical storyteller, and he told the story of how the atom bomb was made. And as part of it, as part of the story, he talked about how Einstein wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt saying the Germans are building an atom bomb and they haven't done it yet. But if we want to nip Germany in the bud, basically, if we want to stop them, we need to either defeat them before they can create this bomb, or we need to beat them at building the bomb ourselves. And he wrote a very famous letter. Einstein wrote a very famous letter to FDR, and this teller recited the entire letter that Einstein wrote to FDR. So we're not just hearing about the story, and we're not just hearing about the letter, we're actually hearing the letter itself as part of the story. Okay? You can do this with a lot of things, especially if you're doing a fringe. If you're doing a fringe of a historical character, like for example, Harriet Tubman. I've seen people do fringes of Harriet Tubman. What better way than to include some of Harriet Tubman's speeches? The most famous one is "Ain't I a Woman?" Very, very powerful speech.
That's not Harriet Tubman, that's Sojourner Truth.
Oh, okay, Sojourner Truth then. But if you were to do a fringe of Sojourner Truth, then what could be more powerful than hearing Sojourner Truth give that speech? Same with Martin Luther King. You could be telling a story about Martin Luther King, or even more so, you could be doing a story about the civil rights movement. And then as part of it, you could give an excerpt or even a full speech of Martin Luther King. Okay, the I Have a Dream speech. Now, as Ken stated, some of these classic works of literature are pretty long. Okay, The Telltale Heart, if you were to read it completely, would take at least 30 to 40 minutes. Okay, that is really long. And you may only have 20 minutes to tell a story. Okay, that's one of the disadvantages of doing something like oral interp. Either you don't have the time to do it, or you have to condense it, which is, to me, even worse. Okay, Edgar Allan Poe was not meant to be condensed, type of thing. So you need to do something in a sense of being able to convey Poe and his message within the time limit that you have. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is my ethical conundrum here. To me, you don't tell a famous story like The Telltale Heart. Okay, that is too well known. And again, it's also too long. Okay, you can't do it for a program. When I've heard people tell The Telltale Heart at storytelling festivals, we literally sat there for a half hour while they recited this. And if it was under that, then it obviously was condensed. Okay, so, and honestly, okay, when I was a child, I had a surgery and I was in Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. And the hospital had a program. And there was a local weatherman. He was very well known. He was the most popular weatherman. Everybody tuned into that station because they liked the way he gave the weather. He came and he told the story of the elephant's child, but he told the story. Now, I had read Kipling's complete Just So stories, including The Elephant's Child. And one of the things I loved about it was Kipling's language and style. And he didn't have any of that. He just basically said, yeah, there was this elephant child. He didn't have a trunk. And so, he was going around being nosy, asking questions. And one day, this alligator grabbed hold of his nose and stretched it. That's how he got his trunk. I'm like, no, that's not as good as Kipling. And I almost called him out for it. But I remembered my mother telling me, don't do that. That's considered to be rude. So I didn't say anything. But ever since then, I've remembered, like, no, this is not what you do. You do not take a famous story and, and retell it. Okay. So that's my feeling. My feeling is, okay, don't do the Edgar Allan Poe. Don't do Rudyard Kipling to retell it. However, if the story is not as well known and it's not as easily recognizable, then by all means, but it's a great story, then by all means, take it, adapt it, and try to capture the flavor of what the story is. Okay. And I was going to actually tell a story that I have done. Now again, I have to emphasize, literature is any written work. When I was a beginning storyteller, I was trying to come up with ghost stories. And I wanted a really good ghost story in my repertoire. And I found this book, Irish Ghost Stories. And I don't remember who the author was, but basically he just recited different ghost stories. And there was this one that I found, but the thing of it is it was a paragraph. That was it. It was a paragraph. Hardly a story. Okay. But I liked the concept of it. And it basically said, well, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And I was like, wow, that's a cool chain of events. It's too bad somebody hasn't taken that and really developed it into a story. And then I thought, why not me? Why can't I do that? Why can't I develop that little tiny story and make it into a full-fledged, scary ghost story? So that's what I did. I took it and I started fleshing it. I put meat on the bones, so to speak. And then I started adding elements to it to make it more eerie or more scary type of thing. And so by the time I got done with it, when I would tell this story, I was taking 10 minutes to tell the story. Whereas if I had just simply read the little paragraph, I don't know if I would have lasted a minute or not. So that's an example of where you take a work of literature and you adapt it into a story that can be told. Now, the other thing that I did with this is, when we talk about ghost stories next month, you'll learn this. There's a type of ghost story that's called a jump story. And I thought this could be a really cool jump story. And so I wrote it, and I wrote the ending of it so that it became that jump story. And I actually told that story at the Texas Storytelling Festival as part of the Ghost Story Night. This was quite a while ago. But that is, of all of the ghost stories I tell, that is the one that people like the most. But the thing of it is I adapted that from a work of literature. Another story, some of you may have heard my famous Liar's Tale. This is the tale that I won the Liar's Contest with a couple of years ago. And it's called Grandpa and the Buffalo. And basically what it was is it was that same situation. It was just a paragraph long. And I thought, that is a cool story. Somebody needs to develop that. And so I thought, why not? I like this story. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to develop this. So I started putting the flesh on the bones, so to speak. And I ended up adding a lot of things to it and different things like that to make it funny. And I ended up coming up with an award-winning lie, so to speak, because I told that story at the Liars Contest and I won that year with that particular story. And the funny thing of it is I always thought a liar's tale had to be something that was contemporary. And there was a storyteller named Greg Rogers, and he was a Native American storyteller, and we performed at several things together, and we ended up becoming good friends. And I told that story, and he goes, you want to enter that into a liar's contest. So I thought, what the hey? What's the worst thing that can happen, right? So I entered it in the liar's contest and I won. But if you took the original thing that gave me the inspiration for that story, it's just like this short little paragraph. It was literally a skeleton, and I took the meat to it, I put it on the bones, and over time I developed it into a great, entertaining, humorous story. That happened to qualify as a liar's tale. Okay, so you can do that. Now, all right, we are getting close to taking a break. I think it's like 7:51. So what I would like to do right now is let's all of us go ahead, take a break, stretch, go to the bathroom, grab a drink, sandwich, whatever we need, and then we'll come back and we will explore this further. And then I will give a demonstration by telling you a story that I adapted from a work of literature and make that comparison. Oni, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was just asking Tony, can I share a resource for stories for those who are new, how they can find stories to tell in the chat? May I put it in the chat?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll put it in the chat. Thank you. This is very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions before we take a break? No? Okay. All right, everybody. Stretch, do whatever you need to do, and we will come back at probably about 8:02, 8:03. me just thinking, sweet, are you need to tell it first person as
Hey, Viveka. Hi.
Yes.
Hey,
How
I
are
see.
you?
I see you're putting on some neat programs.
Yeah.
I was
Hopefully you'll
planning on
join
coming
us.
the other night, and I forgot it. But you got some topics and so on. You seem to be pretty active.
Yeah, trying to keep things going. Next month the theme is joy and celebration, so hopefully you can join us.
What was the celebration?
Joy and
Oh,
celebration
join.
is the
Okay, all right.
theme.
Well, good luck on all that.
Thank you.
Tony, I have to tell you, I think you're one of the best read people I know.
Oh, thank you.
You weren't just stacking those books; you were reading a lot of them. But I worked with librarians a lot, and that's just what. It's interesting to watch librarians get so excited about something, a new book or a new something. They're on top of it. So,
Well, I became a librarian because I love to read.
yeah,
And I found out that being a librarian, you don't have time to read.
a lot of
The
paperwork.
bad part of it is I had to see all of the new books that came in, and those were all of the books that I wanted to read but didn't have time. So at times it became very frustrating.
Well, it's obviously you've read a bunch of them.
I'm sorry.
It's obvious you read a bunch of them because over the years I've watched all the references you make to things. So
I tried. Usually, what I would do is during my lunch hour, I would lock myself up in my office, and that's when I would read.
uh,
And then, of course, being the bachelor and everything that I am, the minute I got home, I would do that too.
hey Ken, I just copied the thing you put in the chat. Take a look at that.
That's what I do. That's the process I used when I adapted the Headless Horseman to tell. I was hired to come in to take the place of someone who called in sick. It was a big ghost story presentation in near Indianapolis, and their teller was sick, so they called me like 2 days before, and they said, "Can you come in and tell the Legend of Sleepy Hollow?" And I said, "Sure. How much time have I got?" They said, "Oh, 20 minutes." I went, "Oh." Uh, and they told me that the fellow who was called in sick was reading it out loud. I said, "There's no way he's reading that 20 minutes." And they said, "Well, actually, he just reads the chase scene at the end." I went, "You can do better than that." And so I came up with a 20-minute version of the entire story. And the kids in the audience, some of them had actually read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and they were very happy with it. So anyway, I have applied this step. It's kind of based on my strength of being a listener to learn stories. So I have to hear the story I'm working on.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this is going to work the same for everybody, but I figured while we were talking about this, I would just toss it into the chat.
Tony, I also wanted to chime in here because I've adapted in the past, in the distant past, literature and made it into a reader's theater, when it was in, for different parts and then for students. I've not ever done it with stories. So when you ask the question about literature, taking literature and then adapting it into storytelling, that is not something that I'm as familiar with. But the other one, would you say though, with when we're dealing with storytelling, there's more improvisation involved, whereas with oral interpretation, we try to stay as true as we can to the interpretation of the author, if that's known.
Well, storytelling in itself is an improvisational art. because you are not using a script. You are basically getting up there, you are telling something in your own words. And the only thing that you really have is that you are familiar enough with the story that you can tell it without making a mistake. Um, so yes, improvisation is a big part of that.
Okay.
Because improvisation is a big part of storytelling itself.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
And I seriously, I have found when I have been performing, like for example, I was telling this, it was kind of a tall tale, but there was also a bit of historical to it. And I was into the storytelling, and basically it was about a bet where two men had bet $1,000 that one couldn't grow an ear of corn in a certain area. And of course, the guy proved him wrong. And so the story of the bet was he decided he needed to go pay him the $1,000. Well, the story takes place back in the 1800s. Okay. You didn't walk around with $1,000 back in the 1800s. You just didn't do that. Now, the man who owed the money was Jim Bridger, a very famous mountain man. And so I said, well, he decided I need to go pay my debt. And I looked into the audience and they were all like, they were really concerned that this man was carrying $1,000 with him. And so I said, in beaver pelts. He paid it off in beaver pelts. And everybody seemed to relax and I was able to go on with the story. But I had to do that bit of improvisation to calm my audience down, type of thing. And improvisation can actually be a very big part of the storytelling success. You have to, sometimes you have to basically realize, okay, I'm in this situation and I need to do something, and improvisation is the way to go.
It's highly responsive to the audience. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I knew a married couple who were both storytellers. They had been storytellers when they met, and when they took their wedding vows, they said yes and.
Okay.
Do you get it?
I think it's time, so we need to get back into this. All right. Now, what I'm going to do for this part of it is to give you an example of how you can adapt literature. I'm going to take a famous work of literature that I think most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with. Now, I mentioned The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and I happen to have, I don't know if you can see it because my screen filter is weird, but I happen to have the complete tales of Edgar Allan Poe here, and I have The Telltale Heart with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read parts of it, and then I'm going to say, okay, if we were to tell this as a story, what would we need to do with this? I'm not going to read the whole story because, like I said, it's a 40-minute story. It doesn't have that many pages, but I have actually read it, and I have had students read it, and it is long. I mean, seriously, even though the number of pages doesn't seem to be a lot, by the time that you tell it or read it, it is a long story. All right. So I'm just gonna read certain parts of it, and then we're gonna say, okay, what can we do if we decide we are going to tell, in our own words, Edgar Allan Poe's famous story? All right, here's the beginning paragraph. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why would you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. All right, now, for those who are not familiar, basically what it is he is a caretaker of an old man, And this old man has something wrong with one eye, probably like a cataract or a film over it. And to him, it looks like a vulture's eye. Okay, so this is where he basically talks about it. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Okay. Now, basically, he comes up with the plan that he's going to wait for him to sleep so he doesn't have to look at the eye. Well, or actually, he wants to kill the man because of his eye, but he decides to do it in his sleep when he's not aware of what's going on. So every night he goes in and he takes a lantern and he makes sure that just a thin ray of light focuses on the eye. Well, he goes in 7 nights in a row. The eye is closed. He can't kill the guy because it's the eye that, driving him nuts, in spite of the fact that he claims he's not insane. But on the 8th night, the eye is open. He sees it. He becomes furious at it. And he rushes in and he kills the man. And then he buries him under the floor. Okay, and then what happens is detectives come. They heard a scream or something to the effect, so they come to investigate. And he says, okay. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasure, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. Okay, then what starts to happen is he hears the beating of the old man's heart, but he's the only one who does. Yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, such as the sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the voice steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? And then finally, what happens, it gets to the point where he can't stand it anymore, and the story concludes. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Okay, now that's the plot. So if you are going to adapt the Telltale Heart, what are you going to do to adapt that work so that you can tell it as a story, but still remain as true to Poe as you can? Okay. All right, Ken.
Well, Tony, I think looking at the story as you would any other story, and you consider who are the characters here. Take us to a specific time and place. We have a character who is clearly mentally unstable. That's part of his character. What does he want? He wants to kill an old man with an eye like a vulture. We don't know what the old man wants, but you can imagine he would want to be left alone. You have the characters, the conflict is how can he kill this old man and get away with it, right? And when he does kill the old man and the police arrive, he goes from wanting to kill the man to wanting to escape punishment. So you're just looking at it as a story. Look at the story arc. What do the characters want? What interferes with that? How do they adapt? In his case, he just goes clear off the edge and becomes, totally insane. And, if he'd been able to hide it before, it's very clear that he's a crazy person.
Okay.
So, basic story analysis, right?
Right. Okay. Now, like one of the questions comes up, this story is obviously first person.
Right.
So when you retell the story, do you tell it first person? Or do you try to tell it third person like an objective observer?
I think if you were trying to convey the story without being overly dramatic, you could do it. You don't necessarily have to do it first person. If you're really trying to condense, I can imagine situations where you might want to do that. You don't want to scare your audience unnecessarily. So, if it were a young audience, for instance.
Okay. Well, see, that's one of the first things you have to decide. You look at the story, and the story, Poe is famous for his style of writing. Okay, so you look at that and you say, oh, okay, he told this story first person. Now he's told other stories where it was third person. And there are probably other stories of Poe, like The Fall of the House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, and so forth, that would probably be more suited to telling simply because they are told in third person. But if you were to do this, are you going to become the madman? Are you going to tell the story from the madman's perspective? Or are you going to tell it third person and say, this is how one person went particularly insane? Okay, now the time limit. Okay, this is to tell the story or to recite it. It is a very long time. So Poe was a master of details. I mean, he describes everything in detail, and it's essential to the story. Like, for example, the Seven Nights, he describes how he goes in, how he opens the door, how he holds the lantern just so that the light can shine right on the old man's eye. And he tells how he puts his finger on the hole so that only a stream of light can enter. That's the only thing. That stream of light is just big enough that it will hit the eye, but nothing else. So it's not like a spotlight on the face. It's a spotlight on the eye itself. Okay. He goes into great detail over that. He goes into great detail how he planned, how he was going to do everything, type of thing. Okay. How much of that detail are you going to include? See, that's something you have to do. And again,
Depends on the time frame.
It depends on the time limit that you have. So you're going to say, okay, maybe I can't spend as much detail about this. I need to spend more detail about this. So this needs to be the focus of my story, type of thing. Or if I include this detail and it's going to take me this much time, how much more time do I have left? And then start looking at the other things that I can condense from it. Okay. All right. There are 4 characters in the story. obviously the protagonist, he's not the hero, but he is the protagonist, is the man who is going insane, who's trying to convince everybody that he's not. Okay, there's the character of the old man. Now, we don't see a lot of him. He's just there. He's the victim. He's the whole reason why this guy is going insane. Okay, so he's an important character, but he's really not there a lot. You know, he's more a topic of discussion than he is anything. And then towards the end, there's the two police officers. And the funny thing of it is, okay, this is the interpretation I get from the story. Okay, the police officers believe him. Okay, yeah, he had a nightmare. He screamed out. Okay, we can buy that. Oh, yeah, the old man, he's absent in the country. Well, nothing has been robbed, nothing is disturbed, you know. So he's gotten away with the crime. What destroys him is his conscience, which manifests itself in the form of a beating heart. So, in other words, his mind is playing tricks on him. His mind is saying it's the old man's heart. Okay, now if we know enough about psychology, we understand, yeah, it's his guilty conscience haunting him, so he's going to reveal himself in front of the two policemen, type of thing. So how do we convey those characters? See, and again, it depends on how we decide to tell the story. If we tell it first person, we have to convey all of those characters from that person's perspective. If we tell it third person, then that gives us a chance to explore these other characters further. Like, what is really going on in the old man's head? Okay, what is really going on in the minds of the policemen? Do they believe his story? Did he get away with it and then suddenly has this nervous breakdown? Or do they really know what's happening and they're setting a trap for him? Okay, so how are you going to convey the characters? Okay, and then the final part of the plot. Okay, and now Ken just mentioned in the chat, it says, I'm going to tell it first person if I want to be dramatic. If I want to move the story along, I'm going to tell it third person. Okay, both are legitimate. Both are completely legitimate as to how you would tell the story. Okay, a lot of third person stories, people make it their own by making it first person. Okay, this is especially true with folk tales where you have the story of Cinderella, but it's all told from one of the stepsisters' viewpoint. I think Cooper Braun, not last festival, but 2 festivals ago, told the story of Cinderella from the perspective of the prince's servant, valet, and how he kind of got the prince, pushing him so that the story would happen, type of thing. Maybe you could tell the story from the perspective of one of the policemen. Like you tell it first person, but instead of the insane dude, you're from the policeman. So there's all these things that you have to consider when you're taking this work and adapting it as a story. Ken?
Yeah. It really boils down to what you're comfortable doing as a storyteller. You're choosing something that you love. You're finding the story in there, and the dramatic energy necessary to pull off the main character is considerable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're wanting to focus on the details, the cleverness, you can do that in third person. It would appear to be as if you were describing a film to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I had an older sister who got real impatient with me because I'd see a movie and I'd tell her everything that happened, and in real time. She'd say, Kenny, wait, tell me the story in 5 sentences, and I had to be true to the story that the film was conveying. So whether you tell it in that character in first person or just everything in third person, I think they're both viable options, personally,
Right.
my opinion.
Right. See, and that's basically what it boils down to, is what is your comfort level? See, the reason that I personally do not retell a famous story, a work of literature, is because I am uncomfortable basically messing with somebody like Poe or Doyle or Kipling. Okay, I'm just not comfortable doing that. That's not to say that the rest of you cannot do that. Okay, some of you may not be comfortable being dramatic. Okay, some of you would prefer to be more, okay, we're going to tell the story and this is how the plot unfolds type of thing. Myself, I'm more dramatic. If I'm going to do the Telltale Heart, I'm going to be the insane guy, and by the end of it, you're going to be hauling me off in a straitjacket. That's how, if I were to do it, that's how I would do it.
That's a story you tell once, right, Tony?
Yes. Okay. So that's the thing. When you are taking another work of literature, what is your comfort level? That's probably the biggest thing to do that. Now, somebody in the chat, let me get into the chat. And they told about the process. Okay. Trying to find, oh yeah. Okay. Now this is a good process. Okay. Myself, I probably would not have presented this, but at the same time, it is something that I would definitely look at and you could apply to it. First of all, well, this is true with any story. Never tell a story you don't like. Okay, so if you're going to do a work of literature, it needs to be one that you love. Okay, yes, read the story several times. You've got to be familiar with the story. Okay, if you are not familiar with the story, you're going to make mistakes, even if it's a familiar one, like the Three Little Pigs. I've had students say, oh, I'm going to get up and tell the Three Little Pigs. I don't need to practice it. Well, he gets up there and he goes, well, the first little pig made his house out of sticks. What? No, wait a minute. No, it was straw. Wasn't it straw? I think it was straw. Yeah, it was straw. Okay. If he was more familiar with his story, he wouldn't have made that mistake. He thought he was familiar with the story, but obviously he wasn't, or he wouldn't have made the mistakes that he did. So, yeah, make sure you know the story. Make an outline of the story. I personally have never made an outline of a story, but if that helps you, do it. I don't like to listen to a recording of somebody because then I feel like I have to do it the way that they recorded it rather than my own interpretation. I played Dr. Chumley in Harvey once, and the guy that played Harvey, or not Harvey, but Elwood Dowd, said, oh, I've got to work on my James Stewart impersonation. And I'm like, no, come up with your own interpretation. Play Elwood Dowd the way you would play Elwood Dowd, not the way James Stewart played it, kind of thing. So I don't like to listen to another version of the story because then I feel like I have to follow it. And it doesn't allow me to be original. However, if that helps you, go for it. Tell the different versions. If you have one version, tell it. Then tell the other version and see what it sounds like. Which one sounds better? That's the one you want to go with. Okay. Listen to yourself tell the story is good. I'm not a note person, again, because I feel like I become too dependent on the notes. I might look at the note, I might tell the story, then go back and look at my notes and say, oh, I forgot this type of thing. And yes, 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 practice, practice, practice. Because if nothing else, when you practice the story, that's where you make the mistakes. The first time you tell the story, you make the mistake. And you can say, okay, I need to be better prepared on this so I don't make this mistake again. So definitely practice. All right, we have a half hour. What I would like to do is I would like to show you an example of a story. Chester, go ahead. I just saw your hand raised.
Well, it's maybe a little bit off, but I have a story that I'm working on. And in the middle of it, I would like to be able to insert a document. But I want to read the document, not tell the document. And I don't know how that fits within the discussion, but it's I'm not sure what my question is, but is that appropriate, inappropriate? What do you feel about that?
Well, before the intermission, I talked about how you can take a work of literature and bring it into a story. Okay. Now, for example, I use the example of the making of the atom bomb, where one one reads the letter of Albert Einstein. So that's what I would do. Somehow in the story, you would say, depending on the type of story, you say, well, this came from my grandfather's diary, or this came from, and then you read that as part of the story.
So you literally could hold out the document and read from the document.
Yes.
To me, that would add something.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
As long as you're not reading the whole thing.
Right. Because
Yeah.
I want the wording to be exact. It's a War Department notice to a family that their son has been killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one bit. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And see, and that's a perfect example. A telegram, of a person who has died. I've seen that in so many movies, so many plays where somebody has arrived at the door and they have a telegram and you know what's in that telegram. And of course, somebody has to read that telegram. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that in storytelling. Okay. All right. This is a story that I took from a work of literature. It is a story. It is not a well-known story. But it is a known author. And I'm not going to mention the author or anything until after the story. All right. And I apologize. This is a Christmas story. So I realize here I am telling a Christmas story in June. Okay. The story is called The Holy Night. A long time ago, almost 2,000 years ago, there was a shepherd. Now, this shepherd was not a good man. He did not like people. He hated people. And the whole reason why was because that's why he became a shepherd. Oh, and by the way, I got to start again because I didn't do the intro. All right, I apologize. It's been a while since I've told this story, so bear with me. Okay. When I was a young boy, my favorite person was my grandmother. I would go and visit with her, and she would be the most wonderful person to be with. She would make cookies. We would play games. But the thing that I loved most about my grandmother was she would tell stories. And because I was such a small child, whenever she would tell me a story, she would lift me up, she would put me on her lap, and she would tell that story. But my grandmother had a very unique way of beginning a story. She would look at me and she would say, now the story that I am going to tell you is true. As true as I can see you, as true as you can see me. Now, this story happened almost 2,000 years ago. There was a man who hated people. He was a shepherd. But the reason that he became a shepherd was because he did not like to be around other people. And being a shepherd allowed him to be by himself. His only companions was his flock of sheep and the sheepdog. But because he did not want people around, he had 3 ways of making sure that a person never came close to him. One of the first things he did was he taught the sheep how to huddle together so that if a person tried to approach him, they couldn't, because the sheep were so tight together they couldn't get through. If somehow that failed, he would train his dog to attack the person. And if that failed, he became very proficient at throwing his staff with incredible accuracy. He would take his staff, he would throw it, and it would hit the person every time. With these 3 skills, so to speak, he seemed to be happy. One day, it was night, and he happened to notice as he was sitting around the fire that there was a star that was shining in the sky. And it was a big star. It was a star that he had never seen before. And it was very unique, very different. And he knew that there was some purpose behind the star, but he really didn't have any idea. And to be honest, he really didn't care. So he was sitting there around his campfire trying to keep warm. And he noticed that something was coming in the distance. He immediately gave the signal. All of the sheep huddled together so that whoever this was or whatever this was, it could not come. And the sheep all huddled together, and he sat there and he watched. And he saw this distant figure suddenly take form. And it was actually more than just one. At the head was a man who was leading a donkey. On top of the donkey was a woman, and this woman was carrying a baby. Obviously, they were cold. The only thing they wanted was the warmth of the man's fire. And as they came close, suddenly the sheep would look at them and would move away, creating a path so that the man and the woman and the child could come forward. He hollered out a command, and the dog immediately went towards him. But as soon as he got to the man, he lay down on the ground, was completely docile. And the man reached down and petted him. The man took his staff. He aimed it. He threw it. And he could have sworn that it was headed right for the man. But once it got to the man, the staff went off to the side and it fell. And he thought, what is going on? A star is shining in the night. The sheep move away. The dog does not attack. Even the staff does not hit its mark. And this man came forward leading the donkey with the woman and the child. And the man said, I mean no harm. All I want to do is warm yourself by the fire, and then we will move on. The shepherd had no choice. The man came forward. He helped his wife off of the donkey. The 2 of them sat around the fire while she held the baby. And suddenly the man became very curious. And he says, why are you traveling alone? It's dangerous. How can you do this? And the man said, well, the reason that we are traveling is because the ruler of the kingdom where we came from wants to kill our baby. He ordered the slaughter of everybody under the age of 2 just so he could kill our child. And we heard about this, and we are fleeing to Egypt to escape. And suddenly, the man's heart started to feel compassion. He could not imagine why anyone would want to kill an innocent child. And he realized then and there he needed to help this man. And he says, warm yourself by the fire. And while you're at it, help yourself to some of the food that I have prepared. They took bowls and they ate the food. They warmed themselves. And the shepherds started to pack things for them to take on their journey. And he says, now, when you get to Egypt, these are the people that you need to talk to. They will keep you safe. And I think I know who your king is that wants to kill your child. And when the time comes, I will send a message to you telling you it's okay to come back. They spent the night. The next morning, they took the provisions. The man helped the woman up onto the donkey, still holding the child. And the man led the donkey away. King Herod died somewhat later. And the shepherd sent a message to this family in Egypt that it was now safe to come home. And ever since then, he didn't hide behind a sheep. He learned to love people. He became a different person. He became a better person to the end of his days. My grandmother finished telling me that story. And then she would look at me and she would say, now this story is true. As true as I can see you, and as true as you can see me. Now, that story is called The Holy Night. It was written by a woman named Selma Lagerlof. She is not a familiar name. However, she is the first woman who ever won the Nobel Prize in Literature. She was from Sweden. And she wrote this story in a collection of stories called Christ's Legends, which was published and was one of the works for which she received the Nobel Prize in Literature. Now, I loved this story. I thought it was a great story for Christmas. But the thing of it was that really appealed to me was the relationship that the child had with the grandmother. And I felt like that was just as much a part of the story as the story itself. So whenever I tell that story, I tell it from the aspect, this is the story that my grandmother told to me. Now, in the story, that's what she actually says to the child. She would begin the story and say, this story is true. As true as I can see you, as true as you can see me. And that's how she ended the story. Now, one of the things about the story that I didn't like was the child kept interrupting her and asking questions. And she would say, be patient, let me get back to the story. And I didn't like that part of the story, so I removed it. Okay, but that was where I took a work of literature and I adapted the story so that I could tell it. Now, copyright and plagiarism states I have to say who the author is. But if I say this is a story written by a woman named Selma Lagerlof, they're not going to believe me when I talk about the grandmother. So I announce the author of the story at the end of the story and say, this didn't happen to my grandmother and myself. This was a story that was written by Selma Lagerlof, and I'm telling it as she wrote it. Okay. That's a work where I have taken a work of literature and adapted it. Okay. I basically kept the same stories. I kept the gist of the idea, everything about it. But I told it so that I could tell it in my own words and still be true as to what she was trying to portray when she wrote that story. Okay. Yes, Ken, the story is based upon the written work. It's a collection called Christ Legends, and the individual story is the very first story, and it is called The Holy Night. Now, what Lagerlof did was she took all of these legends about Christ that were not in the New Testament, but somehow had been passed down as this happened. And they all involved Jesus Christ in one form or another. There are several great stories there. One is that Judas and Christ were childhood playmates, and Judas became very jealous of Christ's powers. One was King Tiberius touching a robe and being healed by it. But there were several great stories, all of them either featuring the Savior as a character or of which revolved around the Savior and his miraculous powers. So that's the story that I took and then I adapted it. Now it's interesting, somebody said, oh, it echoes The Princess Bride. Okay, there's probably some elements to that. I myself have not ever seen The Princess Bride. I know I'm crazy or something. But the thing of it is Selma Lagerlof won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1907. This story was written sometime in the 1800s. So if anything, The Princess Bride echoes this story type of thing. It's almost like people see The Princess Bride and they say, oh, all of these great stories came from The Princess Bride, even the ones that were written 100 years before The Princess Bride was made, kind of thing. So, but like I said, I have taken several things from a written page and put flesh on the bones, so to speak, and made them into great stories to tell. One is a ghost story. One became The Liar's Tale that I won the Liar's Contest with. And you can do that. But if you're going to take a story and that has characters and a plot in it, you need to do it in a way that it reflects what the author was trying to accomplish. And in The Holy Night, I don't think she was just telling a story about Joseph and Mary. I think she was telling a story about the relationship with her grandmother. And to me, that was an integral part of the story, which is why I always begin it, always end it that way. Now, the rest of the stories that are included in Christ Legends are just stories. It's just like a collection of stories. And the only one where she mentions her grandmother is that story. And she mentions the fact that in all of the research of trying to come up with these Christ Legends, that was the only version of that story that she found. She could not find that version of the story anywhere else. And so she thinks that that story was literally made up by her grandmother. And to me, but to me, like I said, that story is not about Joseph and Mary and the shepherd. That story is about the relationship with the child and the grandmother. And that's what I tried to convey whenever I tell that story. But I love that story. And I says, this story needs to be told. And I says, it's written enough in a language where there's not a certain style necessarily that has to be duplicated, but it's a great story. So I retell it. It's one of my more popular Christmas stories that I tell. Okay, does anybody have any comments? I think we're getting close to the end of this. Dennis, I see your hand up.
Sure. I have a question. I'm thinking to the story you just told, the Christmas story. It was a story and you adapted it to yourself. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal a bit ago, and it was talking about a lady that was involved in an accident and incurred severe burns from that accident, and how it changed her life and how she felt better for the accident. And I was thinking, could that be a story that I could tell and use me as the person that I would need? In other words, it's not me personally, because it might be a compelling story, about adversity and how
Right.
you handle adversity. And
yes, and I would say you can do that. And I would say go for it. If you like that story and you feel like it's a story that needs to be told, then by all means do it. Just make sure that somewhere in there you credit the true author.
So the
so
author
at the end of
is
the
somebody who
story,
writes for the newspaper, say for the Wall Street Journal. So
right.
how do I? So they went to
Well,
this person that was involved in the accident and got their story. Is what it
okay,
is.
then you need to say this story was reported by a reporter, okay, and basically give credit as to where you got the story from. And
Okay.
if I were you, I would do that at the end of the story. Because if you
Okay.
say, because if you're going to tell this first person, you want the audience to have the illusion that this is something that happened to you. And that's okay. That's okay.
And I was a little uncomfortable with that. I was a little uncomfortable with that, but you're saying that it's
well,
better.
then at the beginning of the story, say, I got this story from this article by this person, and I would like to tell it first person from the viewpoint of the character that
And
is
then,
listed in the story.
okay, so then I talk about I'm involved in an accident. I received severe burns,
Yes.
described how I got the burns and how it impacted my life.
Right.
But you're saying it would be better if I waited to the end, I'm thinking.
Well, how you want to tell the story is up to you. The
Okay.
way you feel comfortable, the way you feel would be more powerful. I'm just saying, don't commit plagiarism.
Sure.
Make sure somewhere in the story you give credit to the author where you learn that story from.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. And so it's not a critique of how you want to tell the story. It's just a reminder somewhere, don't commit copyright infringement or plagiarism when you do it. Because
I just didn't
otherwise
want.
you're gonna walk
I
away
just
from
didn't.
the audience, and several people in that audience is going to think that that really happened to you.
And I didn't really want people to walk away and think, well, gosh, this happened to you. What a terrible experience.
Yeah. So just make sure you credit the author of this of the original story when you do it. Otherwise,
either the
go
beginning
for it.
or you're okay with it at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Go for it. I would love to hear it when you've got it developed.
Okay. All right.
Sounds like it would be a great story. Seriously. Anybody? Okay, Tom, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted a follow-up question on that kind of that same subject. I took from your discussion that it's okay to acknowledge the source of the story at the beginning or the end.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any guidelines on when you absolutely should do it at the beginning?
No,
Okay.
no. I think the rule is as long as you identify the author, you're okay. Traditionally, it is done at the beginning. But like I said, when I told the story by Selma Lagerlof, if I said, this is a story by Selma Lagerlof, then they're going to know it's not my story. And to me, that ruined the power of the story because I wanted them to feel like this had happened with my grandmother and myself. But at the end of the story, I say, by the way, folks, that never happened to me. That was a story by Selma Lagerlof, and it's in this book. And so I'm not committing plagiarism in doing that. Ken?
I just want to reiterate how important it is to treat the intellectual property of professional journalists. Journalists have gotten an awfully bad rap lately, and a professionally trained journalist has a set method of confirming that the story they're writing is accurate and true. And at the very least, you would want to contact that journalist and let them know what you're planning to do. This telling it as if it happened to you, I'm a little uncomfortable with that idea. I would say run it past the journalist and see what they think about that.
Well, if the journalist, that's another issue, and I'm glad you brought that up. If the author is living, you should not tell the story without their written permission. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that the journalist that wrote the story is still living because the article only came out several weeks ago, within the last several weeks.
Then you need to somehow contact that journalist and say, hey, I loved your story. I'm a storyteller. I would love to tell this story. Would it be okay with you if I did that? And then they would respond back, and then you have proof of written permission to go ahead and tell the story.
Okay.
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 Tom, I don't see a hand, but for some reason you got highlighted here. So I don't know if you had a comment. Andrea, also, there you go. Andrea.
Yeah, I was just hoping that that you would clarify as you did that the difference between long dead authors or substantial changes to things, which is what a lot of things that you were talking about, that you can't take people's not only written work, but if another storyteller has told a piece in public that you heard or put it on recording, that's the same as them publishing it. And you
Yes.
can't just retell their story.
Right.
The original work. A lot of people are very generous. It's pretty easy to write to a lot of authors and get written permission to tell. You can even get permission from people's publishers in the States. But if somebody says no, especially if you're performing and getting paid, that's a pretty major violation.
Okay, even if they're not copyright protected, it is still the work of someone else.
Yeah.
And you are committing plagiarism if you do not give them credit for your story. Now, there is a law that was made in 2000. Anything that is posted on the internet is automatically copyrighted. So if you get something off of the internet, it's copyrighted simply because it was posted on the internet. Now, the other thing too is you really are not supposed to include a living character in any of your stories without their written permission. So if you are telling a family story, for example, you should get that the person that you're telling about, you need to get their permission. Now, Barbara McBride Smith She's a national teller. Many of you are probably familiar with her. She loved to tell a story about her mother, but her mother was alive. And her mother said, and she basically said, understand this, I am telling this story with my mother's permission. And then she would tell the story. But she made it very clear that she had her mother's permission to tell that story. Now, after her mother died, she can tell it many times as she wants. But if you are telling about a living person, then you need to have their written permission to tell their story or to include them as a character in your story.
So let me give you a hypothetical here. Suppose I read in the Dallas Morning News, say somebody was on their way to work Monday morning or something, and they're involved in a crash. There's a fiery crash. The person gets out of their car. They're going from car to car to car. They're pulling women and children out. They're saving people's lives, and other things. And then I decide to tell that story. I don't even know the person's name, but I decide to tell the story because I think it's inspirational that here, as if I was driving, saying that it's not me personally. This was an article in, say, the Dallas Morning News, and I'm driving to work. I'm involved in a horrendous auto accident. My car's on fire. I'm talking about what I'm feeling as the car's on fire. Now, this isn't all in the article, okay, hypothetically. But I know I had to get out of the car, and as I'm getting out of the car, I can see a lady's trapped, her children are screaming, and then I'm running to get that person out of the car along with their children, and on the way, I'm being burned, and I'm adding things to it. And I go through that story.
If again, I would be hesitant about that because they are living people. Now, if you're not mentioning names,
no names are mentioned.
Then it's probably okay. But if you are mentioning names,
no names, no names. Yeah, I'm operating as if it's me driving. It's coming from in this hypothetical, a Dallas Morning News article about a severe accident on 35 or something, and I'm telling the story about a person using me as that person, and letting everybody know that this isn't really me that did all of this, and going through and explaining what this person did and all the lives he saved and what happened.
Okay. And that's fine. Again, though, you need to credit the author of the article. All right. I saw Chester's hand up and then Vivica.
Very good discussion, but I contacted a newspaper lady who had written an article, included a story, and I called and said, could I use that story, and told her how I wanted to use it. She said, fine, go ahead and use it. I stole it from somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, and I said that before, you need, because they are a living writer, you need to get written permission to tell their story.
So Chester, did you get written permission or they just?
You have to have written, well, you could get permission, but if you have written, then you have proof.
So
whereas
using my Dallas Morning,
yeah, go ahead and tell the story, and then he changes his mind, it's your word against his, and most likely they're going to take his word over yours.
So then in the Dallas Morning News example, like Chester, when I reach out to the Dallas Morning News person that wrote the story, this hypothetical story I just made up, and then they would say, yeah, you can use it in your story.
Okay. Well, if you got it from a news article, it's not hypothetical. First of all.
Well, the one I'm looking at would be from a Wall Street Journal article. And it's about somebody that was involved in an accident.
That author's written permission to tell that story. Okay.
There was one other example I could share with you. I was recently doing a workshop, and I asked permission for the people who do the Family Circus cartoon. You might be familiar, it's on the Sunday papers. It absolutely fit my workshop pretty well, and I wrote for permission. And they said, yes, you have permission to use it, until they found out the workshop was going to be put on YouTube. And then they said no. And I thought that was an interesting distinction.
Yeah. Okay, Vivica.
So,
by the way, just so you know, we're technically overtime, but I'm going to stay here and answer the questions. Okay, so Vivica, you're next.
Okay. Most of my stories are personal stories. A lot of times I will speak in vague terms about who the other people are. My question though is, if t do I need permission where I'm not using names to tell the story of events that, I
If
mean, my
you're
family members would
okay,
know, they would recognize
if
the events.
if you're not, well, the thing of it is, that's the thing. If they recognize the event, most likely they're going to know who you're talking about. So then, yes, you have to have the written permission.
Even though I'm not using their names.
Well, okay, if I say in 1968 there was this black man who was assassinated, okay, I'm not saying the name, but everybody knows I'm talking about Martin Luther King.
Hmm.
Now, you know, so yeah. So if that person is living and people know that that happened to that person, even though you don't say a name, you are telling their story without their permission. And if they are living, you have to have their permission. That is very clear.
Okay,
So like, for
in my
example,
case though, it's my
I could say, oh, this happened to my brother. Well, everybody that knows my brother knows who I'm talking about. So even though I don't mention his name, I don't have his permission to tell that story. My brother is going to come back and he's not going to be very happy about it. Okay. So if you tell a story about somebody who can be easily recognized, even if you're not mentioning them by name, you still have to have permission to tell their story. Like with
to
Barbara
tell
Bride
their
Smith,
story, right?
Barbara
What I'm
McBride Smith
asking
did
though,
not mention a name. She said, my mother. Okay. But people knew her mother.
right.
Okay. So
So I'm asking,
she had to have her mother's permission to tell that story, even if she wasn't using her name.
okay. I'm asking about stories. Typically, I'm not telling a story that's about somebody else. It's usually a story that I'm one, at least one of the characters. It's, and it's things that I'm observing.
Okay. Well,
I'm
if you're talking about somebody that's long dead,
mhm,
um, then you're okay. If you're talking about a character in a folk tale, you're fine. Okay. But
mhm,
if it's somebody that's living and can be easily recognized, people would
in
say,
my
oh,
story.
you're telling that story about so and so, then you need to have their permission.
Okay. And then changing that question slightly, if I'm telling a totally made up story, but I'm using names of people I actually know. Okay.
Change the names to somebody else. And I will tell you, when I write stories, like when I'm writing stories, a lot of times I will have a website that says popular names. And I will say, okay, I want this character to start with a C. So I look up, oh, that one looks like it would be a good one. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But see, my mother would tell a story about my brother in Vietnam. But what it really was, it was a joke, and she thought it would be funnier if, because it involved Vietnam veterans, she thought it would be funnier if she said, well, this happened to Wayne, my brother. Okay. So she would tell the story as though it happened to Wayne. So then we would all go to Wayne and said, oh, hey, mom told us that story about you on the bus. He goes, that never happened. Where did you hear that? And he was not a happy camper about it. So, yeah, if the person is living, don't use their names unless you have written permission. That's just the rule of thumb. And seriously, if you have to ask yourself if it's okay to do it, most likely the answer is no.
Gotcha.
Okay, Deandra.
Question is, stories that are in the public domain, they can be used?
Yes, if they're in the public domain, yes, they can.
Okay.
And see, the thing of it is, okay, like now my brother Wayne that I mentioned in that story, he's dead. He's been dead for like 4 or 5 years. So I could tell any story about Wayne and I'm okay. Okay. Now, if I include his wife, no, I can't mention her in the story because she's still alive. So,
thank you.
Okay. I'm seeing one other raised hand. I guess they took Ken.
Yep. So, with regard to Dennis's comment about the story about the car accidents, it occurred to me, Dennis, as I heard you talking about it, the story for you is how that news story affected you, how you were so moved, you felt compelled to share that story. So use that. Say, the other day I was reading a news article and it was so vivid and so meaningful, I could really even see myself. And that this is all true, right? You were inspired to think of yourself in that situation.
Right.
So if you frame it like that, then that's a peaceful compromise. You're able to talk about the story because it moved you.
Right.
Right.
But
So
at the
then I
same
could,
time, you would not have gotten that story without the article by the journalist. And you
Right.
need to credit him.
Right.
sure.
So
Sure.
the journalist is going to appreciate being referenced as part of your telling of that story.
Yeah.
And if
Right.
you're just simply saying how you imagined yourself in the scene because it was so vivid, that is
Mhm.
all true based on your experience as a reader and someone listening to that story, let's say.
Well, see,
So,
and you
in
said,
that case, Ken, are you suggesting that I need to get the journalist's approval or not?
Tony's been,
to be on the safe side, I would say
yes.
yes.
Okay.
But in addition to that, instead of talking to the journalist saying, "Hey, I read your story and
Right.
I'm gonna tell it as if it happened to me," and the journalist
Right.
is going to
Right.
go,
Yes.
"What?"
Yeah.
So
Okay.
keep it true
Right.
and allow the story to be you.
Right.
It's your
Right.
reaction to the story.
Okay.
Right.
Well, see, you mentioned, say, I read this article in the Dallas News. All you have to do is say, I read this article by in the Dallas News. You're covered.
Right. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
You're really making this more complicated than it has to be.
Well, I'm new to this, so
I understand. And
I don't know all the nuances on all of this, but I found it an interesting story, an inspiring story about somebody that went through a lot of hardship and stuff, and I thought might be worth sharing to other people that have challenges in life, and that when you get to the other end, it may work out. So,
okay, all right. It is 9:14.
appreciate all the
Actually,
input.
9:15. So this workshop technically ended 15 minutes ago.
I'm sorry, everybody.
I appreciate the questions, and I'm glad that people are thinking and they're asking questions, because apparently I have given you some kind of information that you could hopefully walk away from this and use it to make your storytelling ability better.
If
Now,
nothing else, I haven't been sleeping during your presentation. I've been listening.
Now, at the same time, and I realized we had this debate at the beginning of the discussion, if you have the time that you can tell a famous story, go ahead, memorize it and do it dramatically. And I mean, because it is a good story. Just make sure that you credit the writer when you're doing it. Like if you do the Telltale Heart, do pose the Telltale Heart. But make sure you say, like at the beginning, you would say, I'm going to tell you the story of the Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And by the way, with fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen was an original fairy tale writer. So if you tell a story such as The Little Mermaid, that is his original work. That is not a traditional folktale. A lot of people think Hans Christian Andersen falls in the category of being traditional. And even though his stories are in the public domain, you still need to credit him as the author of that original story. So research your story and make sure it is indeed a retold folk tale or it is a original work of literature.
Sure. My challenge is that I grew up in a household where nobody read anything. And so I don't know anything about fairy tales or any of that stuff. So, but
you know what? This is the modern age of the internet. You can type in who wrote The Little Mermaid, and it will tell you Hans Christian Andersen.
Yes. I would be more inclined to ask ChatGPT to give me the mathematical equations on the Nobel Prize in economics.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
But make sure that it is indeed a retold folk tale or whether it's an original work. And if it's an original work, you have, even if they're in the public domain, you're not guilty of copyright infringement, but you are guilty of plagiarism.
Okay.
And you have to give the author credit.
Okay. Tony, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the
well, thank you all. Sorry to keep you over time. I hope you got something out of this. Next month, I am also teaching the master class, and we will be doing ghost stories, how to tell a good ghost story. So I hope you tune in for that one. All right, John, back to you, if you're still here.
It was great to have your presentation, and we look forward to seeing you all the next time we see you. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for tuning in. See you all later.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.